The night was still. It was August 13th, 2018. Shanann Watts was on her way home. She had been in Arizona for a business trip. A work conference for Lavelle, the multi-level marketing company she passionately promoted. Her friend, Nicole Atkinson, drove her from the airport. They arrived at the Watts family home in Frederick, Colorado, at precisely 1:48 a.m. Shanann, pregnant with their third child, a boy they planned to name Nico, stepped out of the car. She was tired, no doubt, but likely looking forward to seeing her two young daughters, Bella and Celeste. Little did she know, these would be her final moments of freedom, her last steps into a home that had become a stage for a terrible secret. Inside that suburban house, a darkness was brewing. Her husband, Chris Watts, was waiting. Was he asleep? Or was he anticipating her arrival with a chilling plan already set in motion? The children, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste, were presumably asleep in their beds. They were the center of Shanann's world, often featured in her vibrant social media posts. The house at 2825 Saratoga Trail should have been a sanctuary, a place of love and family. But on this particular morning, it was about to become a crime scene, a place where the unthinkable would occur, shattering the illusion of a happy American family. The ordinary events of her return masked an extraordinary horror. As Shanann entered her home, the quiet of the early morning hours would soon be broken, not by shouts or loud struggles perhaps, but by the chilling execution of a monstrous plan. We may never know the exact sequence of events in those first few minutes. Did they speak? Did they argue? Or did Chris act swiftly, silencing the woman who loved him, the mother of his children? The details that emerged later would paint a grim picture, a picture of betrayal in its most extreme form, a husband turning against his wife, the protector becoming the predator. The home she had built, filled with memories and dreams, was about to be violated. The hours that followed Shanann's arrival are shrouded in the perpetrator's deceit. Chris Watts would later claim they had an emotional conversation. He would try to control the narrative, just as he had tried to control his life, his image, and ultimately, his family. But the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. And what happened inside that house in the pre-dawn darkness would eventually come to light, revealing a betrayal so profound it would shock the nation. The finality of that return, the end of Shanann's journey, marked the beginning of a horrifying discovery. A discovery that would expose the lies. On social media, particularly Facebook, Shanann Watts curated an image of domestic bliss. Her posts were prolific. They depicted a vibrant, loving family. Chris was often portrayed as the doting husband, the hard-working father. Bella and Celeste were angelic children, always smiling, always happy. Shanann herself appeared energetic, successful in her Lavelle business, and deeply in love with her life. She shared videos of Chris playing with the girls, heartfelt messages about her love for her husband, and excited updates about her pregnancy with Nico. It was, by all appearances, the American dream playing out in real time for all her friends and followers to see. This was the image they projected to the world. This carefully constructed facade was incredibly persuasive. Friends and family saw the posts. They believed in the happiness that Shanann so enthusiastically shared. She often spoke about Chris being her rock, her best friend. The pictures showed family vacations, birthday celebrations, and quiet moments at home that seemed to radiate warmth and affection. There were posts about overcoming financial struggles together, about building a future. For anyone looking from the outside, the Watts family seemed to have it all: a beautiful home, healthy children, and a strong marital bond. But behind the screen, a different story was unfolding, one of darkness and deceit. The contrast between this public portrayal and the grim reality that would soon be uncovered is stark. It's a chilling reminder that what we see online is often a curated highlight reel, not the full picture. Shanann used her platform to promote her business, and a happy family image was integral to that brand. She was selling a lifestyle, and her family was part of that package. This reliance on a perfect public image might have made it even harder for her, and for those around her, to see the cracks that were forming beneath the surface. The pressure to maintain this illusion could have been immense, perhaps blinding her to the growing danger within her own home. Chris Watts too played his part in this charade, albeit more passively. He appeared in the videos, smiled for the photos, and by all outward accounts, seemed to be the loving family man Shanann described. But investigators would later uncover a hidden life. A life that included infidelity and a desire to escape the very family he pretended to cherish. The Facebook posts, once seen as evidence of a happy life, would later become haunting reminders of the deep deception that lay at the heart of this tragedy. The perfect family was, in fact, a perfect lie, a carefully constructed illusion about to crumble. The morning of Monday, August 13, 2018, arrived like any other. But for Shanann Watts, it was a day she would never see. She had a doctor's appointment scheduled for 10 o'clock a.m. It was a routine checkup for her pregnancy. When Shanann, who was meticulous about appointments and always communicative, failed to show up, a red flag was immediately raised. Her friend, Nicole Atkinson, the same friend who had dropped her home just hours earlier, was the first to feel a deep sense of unease. Nicole knew Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant and wouldn't miss this appointment, especially not without letting someone know. This was completely out of character for her. Nicole tried calling Shanann. She sent text messages. There was no response. This silence was deeply troubling. Shanann was constantly on her phone, engaging with her Lavelle network, checking in with friends and family. For her to be unreachable was highly unusual, almost alarming. Nicole's concern grew with each passing hour. She knew Shanann had been feeling unwell during her trip, another reason she wouldn't just skip a medical visit. The silence from Shanann's phone was deafening, signaling that something was terribly wrong. Nicole decided she couldn't just wait and hope for the best. She had to act. Unable to reach Shanann, Nicole Atkinson made a crucial decision. She contacted Chris Watts at his workplace, Anadarko Petroleum. Chris, according to Nicole, seemed unconcerned, or at least not as alarmed as she was. He reportedly told her that Shanann had taken the girls to a friend's house for a play date. This explanation didn't sit right with Nicole. It felt off. Why wouldn't Shanann have told her? Why wasn't her phone on? Trusting her intuition, Nicole decided to go to the Watts home herself. When she arrived and found no sign of Shanann or the children, her fear intensified. She then made the call that officially set the investigation in motion. She called the Frederick Police Department to report Shanann and her daughters missing. The police arrived at the Watts residence around 1:40 p.m. that Monday. Chris Watts met them there, having returned from work. He allowed officers into the home. He told them he and Shanann had an emotional conversation that morning before he left for work around 5:15 a.m. He claimed he thought she might have taken the children somewhere. Inside the house, police found Shanann's purse, her keys, and her mobile phone. These were items a mother would never leave behind if she had voluntarily taken her children somewhere. The scene was too neat, too undisturbed, yet the essential items for departure were still there. The first alarms had sounded, and the search for Shanann, Bella, and Celeste Watts had begun. As police began their initial investigation at the Watts home, a crucial piece of evidence was, quite literally, next door. A neighbor, Nate Trinastic, had a surveillance camera installed on his garage. This camera faced the Watts driveway. When Nate learned that Shanann and the children were missing, he immediately checked his footage from that morning. What he found was unsettling. The video showed Chris Watts' truck. Chris was seen backing it up to the garage. He was loading items into the truck bed. This activity occurred around 5:27 a.m. on Monday, August 13th. The timing was consistent with when Chris claimed he left for work. The footage itself wasn't overtly incriminating at first glance. It showed a man loading his work truck. However, in the context of a missing wife and 2 young children, every detail became significant. Chris's movements seemed methodical. He made several trips between the garage and the truck. The items he was loading weren't clearly visible, but the sheer fact that this activity was captured provided a timeline. It provided a visual record of Chris's actions on the morning his family disappeared. Nate Trinastic promptly shared this footage with the police. It became a pivotal piece of the puzzle investigators were trying to assemble. It was concrete, objective evidence. Meanwhile, as the search intensified, Chris Watts agreed to give media interviews. He stood in front of news cameras. He pleaded for the safe return of his family. He described his daughters, Bella and Celeste. He talked about how much he missed them. He spoke of his pregnant wife, Shanann. "Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back," he said to one reporter, his voice seemingly strained with emotion. "If somebody has her, please just bring her back. I need to see everybody. I need to see everybody again. This house is not complete without anybody here." His performance was, for some, convincing. For others, something felt off. His demeanor during these interviews would later be heavily scrutinized. Was it genuine grief and desperation? Or was it a calculated performance by a man hiding a monstrous secret? He appeared distraught, yet some observers noted a lack of genuine tears, a certain detachment. He spoke about his children in the past tense at one point, a slip that investigators would note. His body language, his choice of words, everything was under a microscope. The concerned husband appealing for his family's return was a stark contrast to the man seen on the neighbor's CCTV, methodically loading his truck in the pre-dawn hours. The public pleas were yet another layer of deception. Section 5. Cracks in the story. The investigation unfolds. The initial 24 to 48 hours of a missing person case are critical. Investigators from the Frederick Police Department, soon joined by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and the FBI, began to dig deeper into Chris Watts' life. They meticulously combed through the Watts home, searching for any sign of a struggle, any clue that could point to what happened to Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. While Chris maintained his story of Shanann leaving voluntarily after an emotional discussion, inconsistencies began to emerge. His calm demeanor, for a man whose entire family had vanished, struck some investigators as unusual. The story he told just didn't quite add up with the evidence they were finding, or rather not finding. A significant breakthrough came when investigators started examining Chris Watts' digital footprint. They looked at his phone records, his text messages, and his internet search history. It was here that they uncovered a secret life. Chris Watts was having an affair. He had been involved with a co-worker from Anadarko Petroleum, a woman named Nicole Kessinger. This discovery was a game-changer. It provided a powerful motive. Suddenly, the image of the devoted family man shattered. The affair had been going on for several weeks, and it was serious. Kessinger later told investigators that Chris had told her he was in the process of separating from Shanann. The digital evidence painted a damning picture. Text messages between Chris and Nicole Kessinger revealed the intensity of their relationship. It also showed Chris lying to Kessinger about the status of his marriage and divorce. Financial records also came under scrutiny. The Watts family, despite Shanann's success with Lavelle, was reportedly facing significant financial strain. They had filed for bankruptcy in 2015. They were under pressure from their homeowners association. While financial stress can be a factor in domestic turmoil, the affair seemed to be the more potent catalyst for Chris's desire for a new, unencumbered life. The investigation was rapidly moving away from a missing persons case towards something far more sinister. Shanann's phone, found tucked between couch cushions, also yielded vital information. Texts between her and Chris in the days and weeks leading up to her disappearance revealed increasing tension in their marriage. Shanann had suspected Chris was being unfaithful, or, at the very least, emotionally distant. She had confided in friends about her concerns. She was fighting to save her marriage, while Chris, it seemed, was secretly planning his exit. Every piece of digital evidence, every text message, every GPS point from his phone was drawing the net tighter around Chris Watts. The cracks in his story were becoming gaping holes. Section 6. The polygraph, the confession, the horrific truth. With suspicions mounting, investigators asked Chris Watts to take a polygraph examination. This occurred on Wednesday, August 15th, just 2 days after his family was reported missing. A polygraph, often called a lie detector test, measures physiological responses like heart rate, blood pressure, and respiration, while a person answers a series of questions. Chris agreed to take the test. He likely believed he could deceive the machine, just as he had tried to deceive everyone around him. He was wrong. The results of the polygraph were clear. Chris Watts showed significant deception when answering questions about the disappearance of his family. He had failed the test and failed it badly. Confronted with the polygraph results, Chris Watts' composure began to crumble. The investigators pressed him. They knew he was lying. The facade he had maintained for days was finally breaking down. It was during this intense interrogation that Chris Watts offered his first confession. However, it was not the full truth. It was another calculated lie, a desperate attempt to mitigate his own culpability. He claimed that Shanann had strangled their daughters, Bella and Celeste, in a fit of rage after he told her he wanted a separation. He then, in his version of events, flew into a rage and strangled Shanann in retaliation. This monstrous accusation against his murdered wife was yet another layer of his depravity. Despite the horrific nature of this initial confession, it did contain a crucial piece of information. Chris Watts now admitted his family was dead, and he knew where their bodies were. He told investigators that he had taken their bodies to a remote oil works site owned by his employer, Anadarko Petroleum. This was the same site he had driven to on the morning of August 13th, the destination of his early morning truck journey captured by his neighbor's CCTV. He had driven there with the bodies of his wife and 2 young daughters concealed in his vehicle. The investigators immediately prepared to go to the location he described. Following Chris's directions, law enforcement converged on the desolate oil field. The scene that awaited them was beyond comprehension. Shanann Watts' body was found in a shallow grave dug into the dirt. The bodies of Bella and Celeste were discovered submerged inside separate, nearly full oil tanks. Chris had callously pushed his little girls through 8-inch hatches into the crude oil. The horrific truth was finally, brutally, laid bare. The search for Shanann, Bella, and Celeste was over. The loving father and husband was in reality a cold-blooded killer who had systematically annihilated his entire family. The discovery sent shockwaves of horror and disbelief across the country and the world. Section 7. Justice demanded charges, plea, and sentencing. The gruesome discoveries at the Anadarko oil site led to the swift arrest of Chris Watts. On August 21, 2018, he was formally charged with a litany of heinous crimes. These included 5 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for Shanann, 1 for Bella, 1 for Celeste, and 2 additional counts for Bella and Celeste under a Colorado law that recognizes children under 12 killed by someone in a position of trust as a separate aggravating circumstance. He was also charged with 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy for the death of their unborn son Nico, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. The sheer number and severity of the charges reflected the profound brutality of his actions. The case against Chris Watts was overwhelming. The evidence included his own partial confession, though initially misleading, the neighbor's CCTV footage, digital evidence of his affair and internet searches related to it, and the undeniable physical evidence from the recovery site. As the Weld County District Attorney, Michael Rourke, prepared for trial, the question of the death penalty loomed. Colorado still had capital punishment at the time. However, seeking the death penalty is a lengthy, costly, and emotionally draining process for all involved, especially the victims' families. Shanann's family, the Rzuceks, were consulted. They expressed their wish to avoid a drawn-out trial and the possibility of decades of appeals. In a stunning turn, on November 6, 2018, less than 3 months after the murders, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all charges against him. This plea deal was part of an agreement to take the death penalty off the table. By pleading guilty, Chris Watts waived his right to a trial. He accepted responsibility, at least legally, for the murders of his wife and 2 young daughters. This decision spared Shanann's family the additional trauma of reliving the horrific details in a public courtroom setting. It brought a swift, albeit painful resolution to the criminal proceedings. The community, and indeed the nation, awaited the sentencing. On November 19, 2018, Chris Watts appeared in court for his sentencing. Shanann's father, Frank Rzucek Sr., her mother, Sandra Rzucek, and her brother, Frank Rzucek Jr., delivered powerful and heartbreaking victim impact statements. They spoke of their immense grief, their love for Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico, and the unimaginable pain caused by Chris's betrayal. Judge Marcelo A. Kopkow then handed down the sentence. Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, 3 consecutive and 2 concurrent, plus an additional 48 years for the unlawful termination of pregnancy and 36 years for tampering with deceased bodies. Justice, in the eyes of the law, had been served. Section 8. Behind the Mask, Exploring the Unthinkable Motives. Why did Chris Watts, a man who seemingly had it all, a beautiful family, a home, a steady job, commit such an unspeakable act? This question has haunted investigators, psychologists, and the public since the details of the crime emerged. There is no single simple answer that can fully explain the annihilation of an entire family by a husband and father. However, several factors appear to have converged, creating a perfect storm of narcissism, deceit, and a desperate desire for a new life. The most prominent motive cited is his affair with Nicole Kessinger. Chris Watts had become infatuated. He saw her as his way out, his fresh start. His family, once perhaps a source of pride or contentment, had become an obstacle. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and the unborn Nico stood in the way of the new life he envisioned with Kessinger. Divorce, a common and legal path for ending a marriage, was apparently not an option he seriously considered, or perhaps he felt it was too messy, too slow, or too financially damaging. He wanted a clean break, a complete erasure of his past. This points to a profound level of selfishness and a chilling lack of empathy. He viewed his family not as loved ones, but as impediments to his own desires. This cold calculation is what makes the crime so particularly horrifying. Financial pressures, while likely a secondary factor, may have contributed to his overall stress and dissatisfaction. The Watts family had faced financial difficulties before, and there were ongoing monetary concerns. However, financial strain alone rarely leads to familicide. It's more likely that these pressures added to his feeling of being trapped, making the allure of a fresh start with Kessinger, free from these burdens, even stronger. He may have felt overwhelmed by his responsibilities as a husband and father, especially with a new baby on the way, and saw no other way out than the most brutal one imaginable. This doesn't excuse his actions, but it adds another layer to the complex, dark psychology at play. Ultimately, Chris Watts's actions seem rooted in extreme narcissism and a sociopathic disregard for the lives of others, even those closest to him. He prioritized his own desires above all else, to the point where he was capable of methodically planning and executing the murders of his pregnant wife and 2 small children. He then lied to the police, to the media, and to Shanann's family, maintaining his innocence for days. This ability to deceive, to perform, and to kill without apparent remorse speaks to a deeply disturbed personality. The desire to simply be done with his family, to wipe the slate clean so he could pursue a new relationship, appears to be the horrifying core of his motive. Section 9. Echoes of Tragedy, Lessons and Lifelines. The Chris Watts case serves as a chilling and tragic reminder that intimate partner homicide is a devastating reality, often hidden behind a facade of normalcy. One of the most crucial lessons is that such violence is rarely a sudden, isolated event. Often, there are preceding warning signs, subtle or overt, that indicate escalating control, manipulation, or detachment within a relationship. These can include increasing possessiveness, isolation from friends and family, gaslighting, verbal abuse, financial control, and, as in Chris's case, infidelity coupled with a sudden change in demeanor or future plans. Recognizing these red flags is the first step towards prevention and safety. It's vital for individuals to trust their instincts. Shanann herself had expressed concerns to friends about Chris's growing distance and changes in his behavior. She sensed something was wrong. If someone feels unsafe, controlled, or fearful in their relationship, those feelings are valid and should be taken seriously. Friends and family also play a crucial role. If you notice concerning changes in a loved one's relationship or behavior, or if they confide in you about abuse or fear, listen without judgment and offer support. Sometimes, an outside perspective can help illuminate the danger that the person experiencing it may be downplaying or unable to fully see due to manipulation or fear. The perfect family image, especially one curated on social media, can be dangerously misleading. It can mask deep-seated problems and prevent victims from seeking help, or prevent others from recognizing the signs of distress. This case underscores the importance of looking beyond superficial appearances and fostering open conversations about relationship health and domestic abuse. It also highlights the calculated nature that some perpetrators of familicide possess, meticulously planning their crimes while maintaining an outward appearance of normalcy. This makes it even more critical to pay attention to behavioral changes and expressions of unhappiness or entrapment by either partner. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence or feeling unsafe in a relationship, please know that help is available. You are not alone. The National Domestic Violence Hotline can be reached at 1-800-799-SAFE, 7233, or TTY 1-800-787-3224. Their website, thehotline.org, also offers chat services and a wealth of information. Local domestic violence shelters and support organizations can provide confidential assistance, safety planning, and resources. Reach out. There are people who want to help you find safety and escape a dangerous situation. The tragic story of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico must serve as a catalyst for greater awareness and action to prevent such horrors.